Hello, Courtney Prout here, Environmental Education Outreach Coordinator at Four-Mile Nature Preserve and Arboretum for the Genesee County Parks. Welcome to Encounters with Nature. Genesee County Parks are a great place to create healthy connections to nature. Studies show that being outdoors can help reduce physical and mental stress and create an overall sense of well-being. Additionally, people who enjoy the outdoors usually learn to take care of the outdoors too. Unfortunately, there are some negative encounters with nature as well. Today in this presentation, we're going to cover a few hazards you should be aware of so you could keep yourself safe and also our visitors safe when they visit the parks. One of those hazards is poison ivy. Do you remember the old saying, leaves of three, let it be? Well, that is definitely true when it comes to poison ivy. A member of the cashew family, it's got leaflets of three, which are alternately arranged. The edges of the leaves can be smooth or serrated, and when we say serrated, think the edge of a steak knife. Um, there's often a hairy look to the stem or the blades, and towards the fall, it could turn a beautiful red color. In the springtime, it has white clusters of flowers, and further on in the season, it will have white fruits as well. You might notice poison ivy as ground cover, but it could also climb in the form of a vine, and those vines are going to look very hairy. So if you go out this time of year, that's probably what you're going to notice most, are vines with fine hairs on them. So it's best not to touch those. Right, so here are some images to kind of describe what we just talked about. In the left first picture, you'll see how those leaves of three are reddish tint, but they're also very glossy. And the edges of the leaf are sort of serrated, like that steak knife. And the next picture to the right, you'll notice those leaves are a little less glossy, but still very vibrant and green, and the edges are a little more smooth. The last picture on that row is a picture of the poison ivy in bloom. They're very pretty flowers, not worth touching. And the bottom left is your fruit of the poison ivy plant. And then the picture to the far right on the bottom is a picture of the poison ivy vine. Notice how that is very hairy and there's lots of tendrils there. And you can see some leaves in the picture as well. All parts of the poison ivy plant do contain urushiol oil, and it can cause a very itchy and blistering rash. Ask your supervisor if there's a special wash you can use to help reduce the likelihood of a reaction. Here at Formar, we use Technu, that's TECHNU. The wash is used after a suspected contact with poison ivy, and it may help reduce the chance of developing a rash. There are a couple of poison ivy imposters, such as Virginia creeper. The differences between Virginia creeper and poison ivy is Virginia creeper has 5 leaves, and as seen on the photo to the right, it's got dark purple berries. Generally speaking, the Virginia creeper is a vining plant, so you will see it maybe even on the same tree as a poison ivy vine. Some people may be sensitive to the touch of the leaves, but generally speaking, it does not produce an oil that will cause a reaction like poison ivy. There are other plants that do have leaflets of 3, just like poison ivy. However, not all of them will cause a reaction like poison ivy does. Pictured here is the box elder maple. You can tell that the plant does have leaflets of 3. The edges of each little leaflet are serrated, just like poison ivy could be, but it's unlikely to cause a reaction. Another plant that does have leaves of 3 are wild raspberry. While the plant does have thorns on its stem, the leaves are also unlikely to cause a reaction. Another plant to be wary of is stinging nettle. Its stem and leaf are often covered with stiff little hairs, and it can grow to be about 3 to 7 feet tall. Pictured here is a patch of stinging nettle. You can see that the leaves are heavily serrated and that there's a leaf on either side of the stem. You can sort of see even the tiny little hairs along the stem there. Here's a close-up of those little hairs. They act like little hypodermic needles and they inject a variety of compounds. One of those is formic acid, and that could cause quite a reaction depending on your sensitivity. There's tons of folk remedies out there, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not any of those are worth a shot. Here are the symptoms for stinging nettle, and again, if you find yourself sensitive to stinging nettle, you can try out a folk remedy or consult your healthcare professional. Giant hogweed is an invasive species, and it can grow to gigantic heights. This plant can be hazardous, extremely hazardous to people, and it should be reported immediately. You should call Brian Van Patten, and we'll include his contact information in just a few slides. Here's an image of giant hogweed. Notice the leaves are serrated at the edges, and those blooms resemble a really large Queen Anne lace. And remember, this plant is tall, like between 8 and 15 feet tall. Here's some more visuals just to kind of put it into perspective. Notice that the flower clusters are extraordinarily wide in circumference. The fellow pictured in the left-hand image, he's wearing gloves, and for good reason. Contact with this plant sap can cause extreme damage to your skin, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. The giant hogweed sap will strip away your skin's natural UV protection, and then when exposed to sunlight, that area may burn and blister. Reactions can occur as soon as 48 hours of contact. These images kind of demonstrate the progression or healing of reaction caused by giant hogweed. Notice how by month 5 there's still scarring left over from the contact site. So it's definitely something to be wary of and something to be careful of. And just in case you think you do see it, please report it. Call Brian Van Patten. Again, look for that contact info on the slides coming up. Keep in mind that there is a giant hogweed look-alike. It's called cow parsnip. It's still pretty tall, only about 7 feet tall. It has a large white flower cluster that does resemble Queen Anne's lace, much like giant hogweed. And it does have serrated leaves up to 2.5 feet across, so pretty large leaves. However, it's not dangerous like hogweed is. This is an image of cow parsnip, and you could tell that it's still very tall, and then you can look at the leaves, and those are still large, but not as large as the giant hogweed. This picture really kind of shows the white flower clusters, and though still resembling Queen Anne's lace, they're definitely not as large as the giant hogweed blossoms. So It's easy to get the two plants mixed up, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Always report suspected giant hogweed sightings to Brian Van Pen. Not only do we want to keep ourselves and our visitors safe, but we also want to keep an eye out for our natural resources here at the parks. We want to keep an eye out for oak wilt, and that's caused by a non-native fungus. It's spread by two ways, overland by beetles or spores, and underground through root grafts. It seems like the red oak family is more susceptible, and this fungus is fatal to them. If you're out working in the parks and you accidentally cause some damage to any oak, um, go ahead and do the following. We're going to make a clean cut if applicable, and then to that cut we're going to apply a latex-based paint. You don't want to use any paint that includes petroleum distillates. So even if you had a latex based spray paint, go ahead and spray that onto the wound, sealing it up so in a couple of days the tree can help start healing itself. This oak tree has oak wilt. Notice the browning leaves at the top of the crown. Once a tree has oak wilt, it cannot be cured. The thing that can be done is the surrounding trees are treated as a preventative to help stop the spread. This image is of a stand of oak trees that has oak wilt moving through it. You can see trees that have already died. There's absolutely no leaves on the trees. You can see oak trees that still have some leaves on them, but they're brown. And you can see other healthy trees throughout that stand. You can see how far the different stages of oak wilt have reached, and that's just another illustration of why it's important to identify this as soon as possible so surrounding trees can be treated and the spread can be prevented. Here's an example of leaves from oak trees in Michigan. The top row are all examples of white oaks. The bottom row are all examples of red oaks. And we're going to follow the same procedure for any damaged oak tree in the growing season. That's between April and the end of September to help slow the spread of any potential oak wilt. Oak wilt is in Michigan, and that's why it's something to be cautious of. These red dots indicate confirmed cases of oak wilt. The yellow dots are reported cases of oak wilt, and the blue dots indicate places where trees have been treated for oak wilt. On the side of the slide, you'll notice a link. It'll take you to this page. It's also a tool for reporting oak wilt. We'll need your help in keeping an eye out for the Asian longhorn beetle. It's not known yet to be in Michigan, but it does lay its eggs on a variety of host trees, and it can be devastating to our parks resources and Michigan's natural resources as a whole. Looking at this list alone, you can see the diversity of host trees that the larva of the Asian longhorn beetle feeds on, and that's why it can be such a problem for Michigan. This map illustrates known Asian longhorn beetle infestations. The white squares indicate places where they currently have infestations. Michigan does not have any right now, and that's why it's very important for us as parks employees to make sure we can identify signs of the Asian longhorn beetle and report that as soon as possible. The yellow tint on the map shows saturation of maple forests, and as you can see, the locations of the Asian longhorn beetle are closely related to the presence of maple forests. Here are some life stages of the Asian longhorn beetle. The upper left-hand corner photo shows a larva. The middle photo is an adult beetle. Notice the banding on the antennae, and a little closer inspection of the feet will show that they're sort of purplish. The last picture shows the emergence hole. So the larva spends its entire life inside the tree, eating and growing and growing and eating. Then it will pupate, or it'll kind of rest while its body undergoes changes needed to become an adult. Once the pupation is over, the adult will emerge out of a hole that it chews in the bark of a tree, and it's about as wide as the circumference of a pencil. So knowing these things, we could help identify and slow the spread of this invasive species. Here are some images that might help in the identification or location of Asian longhorn beetle. The larvae, usually you wouldn't see because they're inside of the tree feeding on the sapwood. The adults would emerge through a hole that's about the circumference of a pencil. So that's what you would want to look for on the outside of the tree. If you do find an adult insect, you'll want to look at the antenna, and the feet. These are the markings that would be most important in identification. If you would like to report a suspicion of giant hogweed or Asian longhorn beetle, please contact Brian Van Patten. Use the phone number and email listed on this slide. Be sure to take pictures and provide accurate location and directions for the site. Be prepared to meet on site. Throughout the park system, you'll come into contact with different sorts of woodland creatures. Please ask your supervisor what protocol you should follow when you encounter sick animals, injured animals, or even animals that well-meaning visitors bring you. Working in the parks, you may come across a well-meaning visitor that has found an animal baby that they are sure has been abandoned. The best course of action is to remind them that the mother is probably nearby and will be returning to the baby. Encourage the visitor to please put them back, as the animal baby will survive best when cared for by its mother. Or maybe you have questions about injured animals found at your park. The best place to call is Howell Nature Center. They have a rehabilitation clinic that's open Monday through Friday and also on the weekends. The number is listed on the bottom of this slide. Poisonous and venomous. What's the difference? Well, for poisons to take effect on you, you either have to ingest it or have it come into contact with your skin or body in some fashion. Venom needs to be injected into your body for it to take effect. The first animal I'd like to talk about is the Massasauga rattlesnake. It's Michigan's only native rattlesnake, and it does have a venom that it uses to kill its prey. Its venom is pretty potent, but it's not designed to kill a human. Rattlesnakes do not seek out humans to injure them. Oftentimes, it's an accidental crossing, and the snake is trying to defend itself or scare you away. So if you give the snake time to move on its way, it will be more than happy to get away from you. So just be aware that there are snakes, especially in Genesee County, and there may be 1 or 2 Massasauga rattlesnakes. It is a species. It's a threatened species now, and so you're not allowed to harass it or injure it in any way. So please give our snakes a chance and let them go on their way, and you can go on your way. The next animal I'd like to talk about is the brown recluse, pictured on the right-hand top of the slide. And notice that there's a penny in the picture with the recluse. That's how small it is. A lot of folks imagine the brown recluse to be a giant spider that's here to harm us. Generally speaking, we don't have brown recluses. It's a species that inhabits the southern United States. It can find its way to Michigan, and there might be incidental cases, but for the most part, you won't find brown recluse. But if you are sensitive to spider bites, just be aware that spiders hide out in all kinds of places, and you might want to share that information with your supervisor in case you should incur a spider bite in some way while you're on the job. The next animal we're going to talk about are ticks. Those are definitely out in our parks. Ticks, like any animal, can get dehydrated, so they're going to be in areas where it's cool and a little moist. So just keep yourself safe. Make sure, if you're working in an area with a lot of leaf litter or tallish grasses in a shady spot, off the trail, what have you, tuck your pants into your socks, pull your socks way up, maybe spray a little bit of insect repellent. Picaridin is really good for clothes and that sort of thing. Insect repellent with DEET is also recommended. Ask your supervisor if those things are available, especially if you're going to be out and about where ticks are known to be. The tick specifically pictured is the black-legged tick or the deer tick. Deer ticks are known to carry the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, which is a disease that can affect folks differently and is definitely something to avoid. So again, protect yourself, bug repellent, tuck in your pants to your socks, wear long sleeve shirts, do a tick check after every shift. We don't want you to end up taking that thing home. Michigan has several species of mosquitoes. To keep yourself protected, ask your supervisor for some insect repellent. You can also wear long sleeves, long pants, and a nice hat to keep yourself safe. Mosquitoes can be found indoors or out, so be sure you keep some insect repellent on hand. We all know that the weather in Michigan can be unpredictable, especially when we head into the spring and summer seasons. Ask your supervisor for the emergency response plan for your area for different protocols. I'm going to clear up a couple of definitions for you. First is a severe weather watch, and that's issued whenever conditions exist for severe weather to develop. Watches are usually for large areas of the state and last 2 to 6 hours. Watches give you time to plan and prepare. Keep your eye on the sky and listen for warnings. Warnings are issued whenever a tornado or severe weather have been sighted or is strongly indicated by radar. You must act immediately when you first hear the warning. If the severe weather is reported near you, seek shelter immediately. And those emergency shelters are going to differ depending on what facility or park you're at. So be sure to ask your supervisor where you should take shelter at. Here's an in-place shelter map at 4 Mar Nature Preserve and Arboretum. The shelter areas are highlighted in orange, And during a severe weather warning, we would ask staff and visitors to shelter in place in these areas. If visitors should choose not to shelter in place, they are not allowed to stay on county property and have to leave. Be sure you ask your supervisor for the emergency response plan for your area so you know the protocol for severe weather and other scenarios as well. I'd like to say thank you for joining me to learn about encounters in nature, and I wish you the best. Hopefully, we'll see you soon.